wrong with reusing sprites? As long as you reference them.
It's a free game.
It's for academic purposes. Didn't make any money.
Wait, so if we make an academic game, sell that.
Sell that. By selling it, it's suddenly not academic anymore, methinks. Yeah, we'll just wait a moment to see if Launceston say anything, so not too long. They don't have Troy up there this week, so yeah, he's away for 2 weeks. We got James Riggle doing the Launceston Tutes. Apparently he used to tutor this before. And you probably, hopefully know who he is. He's a guy who does a lot of stuff at Enterprise in Launceston, and he went to America recently doing something. I don't know, some kind of internship. Sweet.
Lindsay, back to graphics this morning.
Yep.
Do you know if we've got TerraGen on the
We don't have it on there, and I have no idea if it's easy to install or not. I would have thought it would be a standalone program that you could open that doesn't actually need to be installed, but otherwise.
There's always a possibility that you get it free for academic use.
I have to put those past Carl.
You don't have to.
Because he's in charge of distribution. And I have to do that super early. Maybe for next year I'll make sure that's on the computers. Yeah. Is it paid otherwise?
It's paid otherwise. I don't know if there's a free version, but it just says that there's an academic version that's free for institutions as well as students and stuff. You just got to email them about it.
Interesting. Back in the day it was free when I used it. Intrigue. Alright, good afternoon everyone. Welcome to week 10. We're pretty much ahead of schedule in terms of compared to last year now. Surprising, since we didn't have a week 1 lecture. So this week's lecture that we'll do is heading back to chapter 5, looking at emotional interaction. So a few different topics there. But as is tradition, let's have a look at another HCI artifact, if you like, and just have a little bit of a look at this one. Interestingly, it's the only video that I could find on the drift table, but there's a link on Milo for a paper about this as well that you should have a read in your own time. If you look at past exams, there was a question about this, but there won't be a question about this one this year. We're going to look at it really briefly. Honestly, don't even know what the past exam question was, and we're going to have a different discussion about it once this video is done.
The interaction design team at the Royal College of Art have invented an object called the drift table. Steve Honest has been living with it for about 2.5 weeks now, and we're going to ask him what he thinks it is. Steve, tell us, what exactly is the drift table?
I would describe it as a digital hot air balloon that you travel in from the comfort of your own front room. Because just like a hot air balloon, you look over the edge or through this lens, which could be the edge, and you just drift around from place to place. And all you do is pick a direction you want to drift in and place weights in that direction. So you place a rock to go west, and if you want to go a bit faster, add some more rocks. And I now finally understand that I'm not really control it apart from tell it which direction I want to drift in. So, all the technology in the drift table is within as opposed to without. There are no buttons and keys to press or anything. Everything is within, and the only interaction I have really is to look through the lens or to place weights in the direction I want to go, and that is what it does. And if you want to do anything more than that, you really should be looking at maybe buying a PlayStation. This is what it does, and it does it really, really well.
So what do I think of the drift table? Well, when I first heard about it, I thought it might be a gimmick or some kind of techno experiment. But for me, it's an art installation that functions very well as a piece of furniture too. Now, would I want one? Yeah.
I really liked it at first, then I went off it because there were no buttons to play with. And now I'm really, really back into it. And I kind of like the way that it's changed my attitude towards it, in that the whole thing of wanting to control it has worn off now. I kind of just like drifting with the drift table.
No, let's not watch that next video. Kind of wanted to though, right? Okay, so the drift table, we can see there that we've got a little display in the middle of the table, and it appears to be scrolling over some mapping satellite data, and he appears to be controlling the direction that the map is going by placing weights on the table in different directions. What sort of interaction type are we seeing here? So the usual question. So when he is placing...
Want to go a bit faster?
Someone from Launceston also says they remember this from Kit 311, which I think was the other unit taken by Christopher Luke, so he's probably used this before. So you can see that he's placing items on the table. When he places an item on the table, what is he doing? Is he instructing? Yeah, you could argue that he's manipulating the items that he's placing on the table. Yep. What about our one that we often haven't mentioned, exploring? Yeah. You could argue that he's exploring the world that's being represented on the little screen. He is moving around that world once he works out he's got some form of control. And so, yeah, our interaction types are sort of straightforward, but also, like, they're not that relevant. So I asked it mainly because I wanted to troll you a little bit, that I asked that about every video. The other thing that we're seeing here is that there's not much interaction here. So we've heard of the terms ambient displays. Would you guys consider this an ambient display?
Without any rocks on it at all?
Yeah, I think it would depend on that. Yep. So without any interaction, I think it does still move, and so it's still displaying something, and you can glance at it. In my opinion, though, I'm not sure if it fully fits the bill of an ambient display, depending on your definition of it, because what information is he gathering from this? We're not told where, where the map is. So, I mean, it could be showing him traffic data on there, but it's clearly not. It's just as a satellite image of possibly somewhere near him. But if he's glancing at this ambient display, is he gathering any information from it? They've talked about this as being just an art installation. So, depending on how you want to define what an ambient display is and what they should be able to do, maybe this isn't one. But one thing that this drift table is exemplifying is ludic design. Has anyone heard of that term before? So that term basically refers to the concept of play or exploration, where we're exploring this device. It's leveraging our curiosity, and we can reflect on our interactions with this, whereas our interactions that we do with this aren't necessarily constrained with any kind of explicit tasks. So when we're playing a game, you mentioned a PlayStation, when we're playing a game, yes, we can have fun in that, but that doesn't mean that it's ludic. It's more that when we're in a game, there's a set of rules, so our world is constrained. We're not allowed to, if we're playing Party Crashers, great game, out on PS4 on October 4th, we're constrained mostly to being on the track. We have some rules that we can only, sometimes we place rules that you can only accelerate and you can't brake in this particular world, so we place some rules and some constraints on our environment. And so these rules are what turn our ludic experience, where we've got just these mechanics, these things we can do, where we can move a car around in the environment. By placing rules and goals into the environment, we've turned our ludic experience into a gaming experience. And so this is clearly not a game, but it is a playful experience that there's no consequences to playing around and interacting with this artifact. You get to explore it, you can be curious about it, but there's no goals, there's no tasks. And so we won't talk too much about that, but it's just something that I wanted to bring up about the drift table, the concept of ludic design. And so if you're interested in that, have a bit of a look at that for yourselves. But yeah, just wanted to mention that. Is there any questions about this or the concept of ludic design? Just bringing in little bits and pieces where I can of stuff that I'm vaguely interested in, as opposed to just delivering last year's content. Okay, so we will have a look at Chapter 5 slides. Here you can see me now. So this section is talking about emotional interaction. So when we look at certain interfaces, we often, there's reasons why we might dislike an interface or like an interface, and some of the determining factors of this, and not all of them by any means, are related to our emotional response to a system. So we respond to what things look like, how the artifact makes us feel. Particularly, we can have annoying interfaces, can elicit an emotional reaction from us that we simply don't want to use a system anymore. So this section is going to look at emotions and the user experience. It's going to look a little bit at expressive but also annoying interfaces somewhat. We're going to mostly skip over models of emotion. We're going to look at automatic emotion recognition and emotional technologies. And we're going to briefly in these slides talk about persuasive technologies, but because behaviour change is an area that I've done some work in, I'm going to either today or next week talk about behaviour change when it comes to human-computer interaction. You probably won't get much out of me today, but when we're looking for slides to deliver next week, it's likely that I'll write something about behaviour change. We'll see, no promises. And finally, this section's going to look at this word that I really don't want to pronounce, anthropomorphism, and the pros and cons of that, where computers or robots or other technology artifacts are trying to mimic human emotions and looks, I guess. So in terms of emotions and the user experience, what we've been talking about a lot so far has been about designing efficient and effective systems. So when we talk about that, the difference between effective and efficient systems, it's kind of like the difference between usable and useful. If we took texting for an example, would you consider texting, so SMS on a phone, to be efficient? And so on my notes, when I first went through this, I had a pretty clear-cut answer to myself that I thought, no, it's not really efficient, because when we're on a phone, typing on a phone, typing a message to someone is a lot slower often than typing a message on a computer, like an email, where we have a keyboard. So when I wrote down on my paper here, no, I was definitely thinking about the interface type. But I guess in other ways, you guys might disagree with me on that, and I tend to disagree with past Lindsay, that we've tried to make texting more efficient as well. We shorten things, we have text speak of some kind. I don't really know it because I've decided I'm too old to know what LOL means, but we have tried to make that more efficient in that manner. But what about effective? Do we feel that texting and SMSing is an effective means of communication? It could be, depending on what you're talking about there. So we can get a message to other people by texting quite easily in any situation where we have our phone on us. And so if we compare it to, can we, hop onto our computer and send an email or writing a letter, then it can be an effective means of contacting someone in a timely fashion. So it depends on what you're measuring when it comes to effectiveness there. But this lecture is more about not thinking about efficiency and effectiveness. We also want to design interactive systems that make people respond in certain ways. So we want to try and design our systems to, with some goal in mind, to make someone happy, to be trustworthy, to teach people things, to motivate them to change their behaviour, even, is what I would write on this slide as an additional point. And so if you think about some of the design decisions that Facebook make, when you log onto Facebook, what's one of the first things we see? We see, what is the message? The prompt says, what's on your mind? It's trying to elicit a response from you. It's not that little placeholder, that little bit of text isn't about making the interface more efficient. It's not about making it more effective. It's trying to, in some ways, I guess, make Facebook your friend because it's speaking in a conversational tone to you. It's asking you a question rather than insert status message here. And is that something I want to talk about? Not here. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. We'll return to Facebook a little bit later. But overall, that sort of thing, when we're talking about the prompts that Facebook give us, that's not about efficiency and effectiveness. It's trying to get a response out of us. And so emotional interaction in general is concerned with how we feel and react when interacting with technology. So this is an interesting slide. The people who wrote this slide have... Well, okay, what do you guys think? Looking at this particular survey, would you consider this to be a survey that's fun to fill in? Seeing some shakes of the head, some grimaces of like, it's a survey, how can it be fun? Is it ever fun? That's exactly right. And so the people who wrote this slide were trying to present this as an example of a particularly good survey that was fun to fill in. I would argue that it's at least a aesthetically appealing survey, that it's nice and clean as opposed to other worse survey systems, but it's not a particularly amazing screenshot of one. But I will read the notes that were on the slide from this, that they said that Wufoo, who makes this survey system, is a company specialising in building online forms and have transformed what they're usually boring and tedious tasks into more fun. And so they've tried to bring in minimalism, they've balanced and aesthetics in terms of bringing that into their design of their forms. And they've said the inspiration for our colour palette did come from our competitors. It was really depressing to see so much software designed to remind people that they're making databases in a windowless office, and so we immediately knew we wanted to go in the opposite direction. My goal was to design Wufoo to feel like something Fisher-Price would make. We were determined to make Wufoo, make sure Wufoo was fun. Fisher-Price does indeed use red, and a fun little font, I guess, but I'm not really seeing it in this picture, but so I just wanted to make fun of this slide more than anything else.
Are they still in business?
I don't know. You're welcome to search that and let us know. So emotional interaction is about what makes us happy, sad, annoyed, anxious, frustrated, motivated, delirious, and so on. And translating this into different aspects of the user experience. So emotional interaction can try and explain why people become emotionally attached to certain products. So things like virtual pets or virtual assistants or Tamagotchis and things like that. Emotional interaction asks the question of, can social robots help reduce loneliness and improve well-being? And it also looks at the topic of how might we change human behaviour through the use of emotive feedback.
Lindsay, an
Yep.
update on WooFoo.
Yes.
They still exist. They got acquired by SurveyMonkey.
Oh, they did. They got acquired by SurveyMonkey. Fair enough. That's interesting. Honestly, don't know what to say about that though. So leveraging people's moods and emotions is tricky because people's moods and emotions are always changing. I'm sure during this lecture your emotions go from bored to mildly amused to straight back to bored again. But if we maybe can leverage that slight bit of amusement to immediately try and put in some fact right after that, then maybe you'll remember that. Who knows? There are reasons why our moods might change, and so this harks back to thinking about the environment that we're in, but also there's uncontrollable or unexpected factors. So our moods can change when the weather changes, or if we get particularly bad news, or we just see that the news these days is depressing, perhaps. Yeah, so those are some examples. Again, that was not my notes, but from the notes of this slide. Yep, and so this slide mentions social robots, and so it's at this point that I will have a look at something that we actually saw while we were away in America recently. We're going to look at Pepper. So yeah, we'll see that Pepper is quite an emotive robot. When we were in America at Microsoft, we got to see a real Pepper standing there. And she's pretty cute. She wasn't doing much at the time, but the guy who was talking to us about other things at Microsoft, Pepper was arguably more attentive, or looked more attentive than some of the people in the room. No, the people in the room were fully engaged by the person talking, but Pepper also felt like she was part of that environment quite well. She would often look up at the guy who was talking, or when the guy moved his hands or made gestures, she would even look and follow his hand sometimes, because sometimes when I make gestures with my hands, sometimes you follow my hands and they distract you from what I'm doing, and so Pepper would do the same. Pepper didn't say anything while we were there because she was, I don't know, she had the wrong firmware on or something like that. I have no idea. But Peppers are being rolled out in a wide range of contexts. But I'll shut up now and see what context we can see in this video. Oops.
Pepper is an interactive social robot which will interact with all members of the family, propose games so that people get together more, or take a picture of your kid while you're not at home.
I'm ready.
Come with me.
No, sorry. My parents always told me never to follow strangers.
Pepper has been developed with SoftBank. SoftBank wanted a robot for two purposes. One, which is already in place live in Japan, is Pepper is an extra staff to welcome customers at SoftBank mobile shops all across Japan.
On three, we each take a deep breath, and then we see who can hold it the longest. 1, 2, 3, go! Wait, since I don't need to breathe, I can't lose.
And as of February 2015, SoftBank Mobile will also sell Peppers to the general public, and you will be able to take one home.
I'm ticklish today.
Pepper will probably also be used a lot to entertain your guests, and we think that a lot of party applications will be very interesting.
So there were emotional reactions from you in the audience when Pepper did things, so that was nice. So yeah, Pepper is being used in quite a range of places. They mentioned that she would be used as a kiosk robot for stores, and I think Microsoft has rolled her out to be the kiosk robot at a number of Microsoft stores around the globe. Because they're trying to change the way that customers might interact with a regular kiosk. They're trying to make the experience more emotive, more personalised, a little bit more engaging, and things like that. And before we go back to the slide though, it's interesting to note that Pepper's design is deliberately not human. And so we can actually see, even in the thumbnails of this one, some examples of the uncanny valley. So who's heard of that term before? Yep, Bryce has heard of it, a few people, yep, cool, there we go, I'll say all your names. So we will have a quick look at the concept of the uncanny valley because it'll come up in the slides again later, and I feel like watching it now. So this article has a bunch of images, but yeah, we'll watch the video because it'll explain slightly better than me in terms of how this graph works, because they have an animated version of this graph. The reason why it's a valley is that if we try and map this in terms of familiarity or how much we respond positively, I guess, to a non-human object that is trying to look more and more human, there hits a point where it becomes too realistic and it just feels like it's a corpse or a zombie. And so we get a valley in our graph. And many robots and designers and stuff like that, they're trying to jump the uncanny valley. But we'll watch a short video on that.
When you look at animations of people or animatronic robots or other strange human-looking things, do you feel repulsed? If so, you, my friend, are a victim of something called the uncanny valley. Trace here for D News, and I have been wanting to talk about this since we started the show. At the 2013 Game Developers Conference last week, this animation was shown by Activision. Does this freak you out? Does it make you uncomfortable? The revulsion that you might be feeling right now? It's called the Uncanny Valley. It was originally coined by Masahiro Mori. He was working with robots back in 1970, and he postulated that as robots began to look more and act human, they would someday repulse their human friends. The graph shows that as a robot becomes more and more human-like, we get more and more comfortable with it until it hits the peak, and then we crash into the Uncanny Valley. And at worst, a still robot will remind us of a corpse, and a moving robot will remind us of a zombie. Since 1970, we have actually made robots more human-like, sometimes hitting deep into that uncanny valley. The problem lies in the human brain. We strive for social interaction, so the brain looks for recognizable faces everywhere. Clouds, inanimate objects, food. As a species, we classify things pretty quickly, and the theory is once our brain decides that you're human, we get really freaked out if we notice that it's actually not human. Our brain does not respond well to being tricked. In 2010, a study in the journal Psychological Science found that we are pretty good at spotting fakes because we look at the eyes. Our robots might not be quite ready to freak us out yet, but animation, movies, They get creepy. In 2001, Final Fantasy The Spirits Within was so painstakingly animated that each frame containing the heroine took an hour and a half to render. But it fell flat in part because viewers hated the dead look in their eyes. Some movie houses completely avoid the valley by not trying to closely mimic humanity. Like Pixar. When they made The Incredibles, they knew not to try and leap the uncanny valley. Instead, they opted for a more animated and angular feel to their characters. Many roboticists and animators have tried to jump the valley, and occasionally they've succeeded, but they've all kind of cheated. This is Professor Ishiguro and his robotic counterpart, Geminoid. It's Geminoid. It's creepy, and depending on the person, he might have actually crossed the uncanny valley. A better example is Gollum from Lord of the Rings. He doesn't really hit the valley for the same reason as Geminoid. They're puppets rather than robots. Gollum's face and movements are based on the acting talent of Andy Serkis, although this isn't, I guess, strictly part of the uncanny valley because Gollum isn't really human. He's not really jumping the valley so much as skirting it, I guess. Tricksy Gollum. The uncanny valley is a topic of debate, with some psychologists finding that it doesn't exist and others finding evidence that it does. So why does it exist? We're still trying to figure that out. But until we do, we're going to have to keep bumbling along, trying to get our robots just at that peak, or all the way on the other side. Do you get creeped out with animations or animatronics like this one? Tell us your story. Tweet at us. Post on our Facebook wall. We love to hear from you. So thanks for tuning in. See you with more videos twice a day, every day. Catch you later.
Cool. So yeah, I figured he would provide a slightly more entertaining description of the uncanny valley with some imagery at the same time, even though now I've watched him, he's pretty annoying voice. Almost as annoying as mine. So yeah, we'll return to the slides now. So we'll do this activity here, just for a little bit. So let's think of the emotions for the last big ticket item that you bought. So let's just yell out what kind of emotions you felt throughout the entire process. That, you know, there was early on, you were thinking about getting the object, there was searching for it, there was actually getting it. What sort of emotions do you think that you went through the last time you bought a big object? You don't have to say what it was, but... yeah. Fear? Yeah. During what phase? Picking. And what were you... what did you fear? So what were you afraid of?
Missing out on a bargain.
Yeah, yeah. Missing out on a bargain. What about fear that you might not make the right choice? So when there are alternatives, you know, you're weighing them up. Were you afraid that you'd get the wrong one, perhaps, and that there would be a superior one? Any other emotions that you went through the last time that you did this?
I would say personally anxiety. I mean, a lot of the stuff I buy grey market importers, so you don't know how legit they are until you actually get your items. So.
Sure. So uncertainty and anxiety over the quality of the item and whether or not it will even appear. So during the phases of waiting for it to arrive, any other emotions you might have felt? Excitement. So anticipating that it's there, that it's coming. I suppose that's possibly more likely when you're getting it from a reputable source, or that you're picking it up from the shop itself and it's in your hands and you're excited about it, or you're excited when you've opened it and you realise that the box is roughly the right size and it's not broken, something like that. Any other emotions? Satisfaction once you've bought the item. What about satisfaction when you've made your choice after looking at the alternatives? So you've gone, okay, I've chosen this one, and I've pressed the buy button. Maybe there's satisfaction there, maybe there's still anxiety over whether or not you picked the right one, but maybe for a moment there's some, I've made a choice, I've done all my research. What about, the shock of realising what the price was? When you went to research it, you went, it's a lot more expensive than expected. There's the realisation of thinking that you actually want that thing. So maybe when you've seen the ad for the PS4 or something, I want that. And so maybe there's excitement, there's the thrill of anticipating getting that. What else? Worry that you made the right choice, stress of considering alternatives. There could be annoyance when you find it advertised somewhere else for a lower price, things like that. So even if we take a relatively simple task like buying a fridge or buying something that's often done online, throughout the entire process we go through a range of emotions. And that exercise was just to highlight that. I won't go over this emotional design model in terms of different kinds of emotions and how they can move from our senses to actual actions. So we'll move on from that. But what the model that we skipped over is trying to show is that emotions can affect how we behave, and I guess we should ask the question of, are emotions more important than thinking? They can sometimes override what we're thinking to the point that we can end up making silly decisions when we're in an emotional state. Saying things that we shouldn't have, emotion dictating the way that we respond to people. When we're shopping, back to that example, maybe the thrill of, or the anticipation of getting some big ticket item means that maybe you bought something that you shouldn't have, or bought it from a place that was just more expensive because you just wanted it now. So those rash decisions can often be dictated by our emotions. And some systems will try to leverage this sort of thing, so they'll entice you to buy it now by trying to make the products look as attractive as possible. And when we think about shopping centres, they put on the happy, lively music to try and make us more likely to want to buy things. Probably part of why there's a bit of kickback from wanting to make stores like Kmart have autism hours. I think they were autism hours. Where the lights are dimmed and the sound is down. I think it was specifically to do with that. It's definitely a thing, but there were, the people who run these companies are tossing up between, do we want to make this a comfortable experience for those shoppers, but also then for that hour reduce our sales. I'd be interested to see if the stats say that they made less sales when they reduced the flashy lights and sounds in a shop. Probably, but I'd be interested to know. So another question here is, do you feel more creative when you're in a happy mood? Do you get less work done when you're feeling stressed? Do you guys, there's a yes from that. It's an interesting time to ask this question in week 10 of semester 2 for some of you in your 3rd year. Do you feel that perhaps because you're all very likely stressed, are you feeling less creative in your ideas? From assignment 2, there were quite a few creative ideas for this unit. So maybe your stress wasn't as high a couple of weeks ago, or maybe you just brain farted an idea at me. I personally managed to get more work done when I'm feeling stressed, but it's probably more to do with deadlines and that I just get stuff done right before a deadline. Throughout my PhD, most of the work was done. You could probably map that onto a few days out of 4 years. Yeah.
I do feel like I get less done. I'm stressed because I procrastinate. I'm thinking like, I've got so much stuff to do.
Yes.
So I procrastinate, but I don't feel like it impacts my creativity though.
Yep, that's right. And so that's highlighting that we're getting different answers from different people here. And so that's hard to predict. I hadn't really thought too much about the first question. I don't think my creativity changes that much, but I don't think I'm more creative as a result of being happy. I think I get more distracted when I'm happy, and so I link my creativity to my work output. because I do a lot of prototyping. And so if I'm not doing a lot of work output and I'm not prototyping much, then I'm probably less creative. I know those things are not fully linked, but yeah, I don't. It's hard to work out the relationship between these things, if there even is one at all. So another topic to talk about is expressive interfaces. These were skipped last year as well, but we'll talk a little bit about this. Expressive interfaces try to provide reassuring feedback that can be both informative and fun, but they can also be intrusive and can make you annoyed. Colour, icons, sounds, graphical elements and animations are used to make the look and feel of an interface appealing, to try and convey some kind of emotional state. And this in turn, however, can affect the usability of an interface. So some people are willing to put up with certain aspects as long as the end result is appealing and aesthetic. And we'll see examples of, I guess, of all of these sort of things. Yeah, I won't make you think of examples because we're just going to see a bunch. So some examples of friendly interfaces then, where people have tried to make a piece of software or a character in a piece of software more friendly to try and get an emotional response from you. An example is Microsoft, which provided a friendly interface for technophobes called At Home with Bob.
It was a huge failure.
It was a huge failure. Excellent. Someone should really update these slides with good recent examples. It used 3D metaphors based upon familiar places. We'll see this on the next slide. It used agents, and so it had pets that talked to the user, and the idea was that it was to try and make users feel more comfortable and at ease. I've seen that dog before as an alternative to Clippy, I'm pretty sure, because I hated Clippy, and if I had to have one sitting on my thing, I had the dog. And I think the reason was because I don't actually like pets or dogs that much, but I liked that his feet lined up so I could place him on my status bars if he was sitting there. So, which you laugh at, but now that I think about it, maybe it made him feel more part of my word processor than just a floating paperclip. And so I didn't know it at the time, I was just messing around. But, that is something about the particular design of this dog that made him slightly better than Clippy, but is still pretty annoying. So this is a way for people who are not really used to computers to interact with a computer back in the days of Windows 95, when it was much more common for people to be like, ooh, what's a computer, how do I use it? It's definitely now defunct, but according to this says it's been resurrected. Oh, okay, you can use this in an emulator. So someone's using this in Windows XP, I think. But yeah, we've talked about Clippy, or we've mentioned him. So this question's sort of asked and answered on this slide of why was Clippy disliked by so many, in that it was annoying, it was distracting, I suspect. Often the wording that it used was patronising. Let's ask ourselves the question, what sort of users did like Clippy? Yep, the back. You liked Clippy. And you're not a 70-year-old woman. Tell me why you liked Clippy. It was entertaining. For how long? You did find it useful? Yeah. Did you keep Clippy, for a long time, or, did you ever actually, decide to kill him eventually? No? Okay. Anyone else think of the general sort of user that might like Clippy? 70-year-old woman. So, someone who's perhaps not used to computers might like the conversational nature that you have with Clippy, that it allows you, it asks you questions, it tries to ask the right questions at the right time. This is still a hard problem today, even with machine learning, AI, all of that. Word just worked out, were you typing the word dear, and then it would think that you're trying to write a letter, although often it would always try and think you're writing a letter. So moving on to just generally frustrating interfaces. There's often a lot of causes for this that, these are things we can all probably relate to. That if an application doesn't work properly, so we don't get the right response from the application when we try and do an action, or that it just full-on crashes. And yeah, related to that is that the system just doesn't do what you want it to do when you try and accomplish a task. And related to that, again, I guess, are the expectations of the entire piece of software. So the second point's probably more about individual functionalities of the software, but then maybe expecting that what's a good example? When the user's expectations are maybe not met. So thinking about my smartwatch, I didn't really know much about it when I got it. It was given to me, and I found it frustrating that a lot of the interaction with the touchscreen isn't exactly what I thought it was. It mostly uses gestures and swiping in directions rather than me being able to do a lot of clicking on individual items. So my expectations of how I would interact with this device were not necessarily met. There's a million ways that could happen. One that we'll see on the next few slides is when the system doesn't provide enough information to enable the user to know what to do. Which of our design principles do you think that one particularly links up to? There's not a one-to-one mapping between these, but we can see there's some links. So number 4 here, if a system doesn't provide sufficient information to enable the user to know what to do. I would argue that this is visibility principle, that a system should make it visible to you what the current state of the system is, what actions you can take. And so if you don't make possible actions visible to the user, then it's unlikely that you're providing enough information to enable the user to know what to do. What about this one, number 5? When error messages pop up that are vague, obtuse, or condemning, or at least thinking particularly about the vague point there. Which design principle is this one? Which one, sorry? Affordance? Not so much when it comes to error messages. Affordances are probably more related to the things that happen before an error pops up, and is possibly even more related to number 4, that a system affords you with the knowledge of what you're able to do. I'm thinking of something different for this one. Anyone else want to guess? I'd start saying random ones, but I don't have them all in my brain. Probably the same as you guys. So if we're thinking about an error message that's vague, perhaps it's not providing enough feedback. So providing feedback to your users about whether an action was successful, whether an action is taking place, whether an action failed or not. Providing as much feedback on what happened as possible is a good idea. And so if we get error messages that are vague, then they're likely not providing enough feedback. We tend to be frustrated with the systems that are garish, noisy, gimmicky, or patronising. So, arguably Clippy fits a lot of that. And yeah, that last one there about you get a long way into a task and find out that a mistake was made earlier. And you need to start all over again. Okay, so what design principle is that one? Now I'm starting to think these were linked to design principles and no one told me. I mean, they all are, but I don't think it was intentional by the slide writers. Mapping? Why do you think it's mapping? Because I don't want to say no. I've just got an idea in my mind of one principle that this relates to, but how do you think it relates to mapping? Yeah, that's plausible. So yeah, if we've got a mapping of certain interface elements to what actions we can do. I wouldn't say it's perhaps related to this last one, just because the crux of this one is that we're carrying out a number of steps, and then later on we found out we'd made a mistake early on in the process. That could have happened because of poor mapping earlier on in the process, but I don't think it's specifically related to mapping. Anyone else want to guess? Yeah. Well, without trying to have black and white answers, this clearly is related in many ways to a system being forgiving. In that, why do you think so?
For a system to be forgiving, it needs to let users be able to make mistakes and either to alert them that they have made a mistake, and then make it easy for them to correct that without having to start all over again.
Yep. So for the purposes of the recording, it was that for a system to be forgiving, it should, one, let you know you've made a mistake, but also, more specifically, let you recover from that mistake, and even better, let you recover from that mistake without needing to start the entire process again. It's a good answer, yes. There's some words from Discord, let me just read them, let's see if they're worth repeating. So he thinks, Launceston thinks that kids might like Clippy. Possibly. Yep. And there was an enjoyable picture of a dialogue box saying, "The task failed successfully." Excellent. I'm surprised that's not in these slides, because we're about to see some examples of error messages not being particularly useful, and I think this is a much better one that he had in the Discord than what we've got on the slides. But we're not talking about that just yet. We're talking about gimmicks here, so things that are amusing to the designer but not necessarily the user. And this is a bit of a contrived example, I think, that, clicking on a link to a website, so what they mean here is a link to an external website. So maybe they've decided to put in a little joke that is to a fictional website that doesn't actually work, but they've decided to put a link to that anyway, and they let you click on it, and of course you get a 404 message saying that it doesn't exist. Some designer perhaps thought it was funny to put that link in there, but then you as a user likely will get frustrated the fact that you've wasted your time going to that, you've got to close the tab that just opened, etc., etc. But actually talking about error messages, so yep, this error message at the top is not particularly descriptive. It might be in some circumstances if you knew exactly what all the errors were and that it was well documented somewhere for you to know exactly what a type 2 error is, but that's almost never the case, especially with Microsoft messages. You'll go and Google an error number and you likely won't be able to progress much further from that. And this slide is an example of a gimmicky response to that. I don't think this alternative is a particularly good alternative. It's unexpectedly quit. Has expectedly quit due to the poor coding. Yeah. Instead, a more descriptive error message would be useful. So there's some guidelines apparently for error messages and what they should and shouldn't include, perhaps, or things like this. So avoid using terms like fatal, invalid, and bad. Those sometimes, within Windows, fatal errors are on a scale where they're worse than a regular warning, things like that. So inside some systems, particularly for stuff that computer scientists are used to, we can identify errors on a range between fatal and just non-fatal, things like that. But to an end user, the difference between fatal, invalid, and bad doesn't really mean anything. And if we describe something as bad, so we say that's a bad username, it doesn't tell us what was actually bad about it. You would be better off actually telling someone, you need to have a number in this, or this username has already been taken. Accompanying things with audio warnings can sometimes help. because sometimes the little dialog box that you get might not be obvious to people that it's even there. So accompanying it with an audio warning is very useful. Avoiding uppercase and long numbers, I guess. Try and make them precise rather than vague, and provide context-sensitive help. Anything I wanted to add to this? Not really. So talking about website error messages in particular, this is a particularly annoying thing that we're seeing less of these days when we're filling out forms, because forms on websites are really common now, and we've worked out good ways to deliver them. But in this one, we've gone to a completely new page after entering our form, but it's telling us that we need to check our last name, our ID, and our password. And if you still can't log in, then blah, blah, do that thing, and we've got a back button. Probably this system also, when we press back, doesn't keep any of our information in the form fields, which would be even worse if our form had a lot of items in it. How would you improve a system like this? So what are some things you've seen on web forms that make the error messages more useful, or the user experience better when you make a mistake? So how would you make it more forgiving? What are some things you guys have seen? Yep, so that's all the way along to making sure that the fields are correct as they're entering in information, and not even waiting until they've tried to press submit. You literally can't press the submit button. And so something that Chrome does these days, like, it's so little effort to add in some simple form validation into your HTML, and Chrome handles all this for you. It won't process the submit button unless you've filled in all the required fields, or it won't let you press submit button if you've even entered numbers into a text field, or vice versa. This sort of stuff we used to have to program a fair bit ourselves with JavaScript, but with HTML5, a lot of these parameters we can put in our HTML, of course, but it's all there, and we just, for a simple validation, Chrome handles all of that logic. You can still fake submit the form and stuff like that, but in terms of a normal user experience, there's really no excuse these days for people to write forms that don't have this kind of validation. And so, yeah, other things we could do is, we use Ajax. We don't lose the entire sort of form fields. We don't go to another page, perhaps. That's why I said Ajax. And so, yeah, let's see what's this one about. More helpful error messages. Yeah, there's some information there, and they've tried to add a little bit of fun, I guess, to the 404 messages. A lot of websites out there that do that these days to make the experience of finding a missing page just that little bit less painful, because they have a nice illustration or something like that. So what we'll do is we'll take a quick break at this point before thinking about whether or not computers should say they're sorry. How many slides have we got left? Yeah, we'll take just 5 minutes so that we can finish this one off today. So we'll be back at 2:05. That's 6 minutes. And someone on the Discord definitely posted something I was thinking of, which was that when you get an error message in Chrome for missing, for not having an internet connection, there's even a game to play. Sorry bro, you have no internet, play a game instead. How can I help?
About the assignment too?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Last week in the tutorial, Murray did Adam's not there. So she advised me because we're doing like a game for VR gear. So she's advised to have a survey. So I think episode in my group we decided to have 2 surveys, the pre-survey, and then we do the usability test, and then we have the whole survey.
Yeah, sure.
But I never do the pre-survey for so long. I tried to Google as well. What kind of questions that should kick off the?
It depends. So, obviously, some things that you want in your pre-survey that
It's
you
not too
wouldn't.
deep, right? It's not too deep like a survey.
No, not really. So one thing you do in a pre-survey is getting just the demographics about, are they male, what's their age, male, female, what's their age, things like that, because you won't need to ask that in the post-survey because that's not going to change, hopefully, over the course of using the app.
Sure.
But other things that you might record in a pre-survey are that, are you looking for a change before and after? Okay, so, maybe you want to get their attitudes towards VR, and then you get them to play it, and then you ask them again the same question, what's your attitude now about VR? I don't know if that's something you actually want to measure, but by checking a pre and post, and the only thing that changes in between is that they use the VR, that's good. If you're asking something exactly like that, you'd probably also want to see, have they used VR before?
I have that one. I have that one, but that was good because I haven't thought about changing the attitude.
Absolutely. It's anything that you think might change before and after the intervention, as we call it. Okay. Is something that I would recommend thinking about for recording this. So without knowing much more about your project, you can tell me more if you like.
We are building like boxing games in the app, like in the phone. But because the Samsung phone is capable in the Samsung Gear, so when they put the Samsung Gear, it's spread out to be 360 degrees, so they can interact with and use a remote, to interact. So in our context, the company has to offer the space for that kind of activity, so that the staff members can involve in that, and they have like some encouragement and motivation, like reminders to the phone, to the email, and we have rewards. Can redeem in the real world, like a $10 ticket, something like that.
Cool.
And the health support, update. So this kind of thing that we embed in that game. So it's not about the game itself; it's just about that connection with that.
Okay. And so who are you thinking of evaluating this with? I mean, obviously we're probably only going to have other students, but the idea of this survey is it aimed at managers who might take on this app and add it to their workplace, or is it for just potential customers, just end users?
That's what my intention to come here to ask you, because last time I had a short time with Mary. She asked me to, if I have anything, just send her, and then she will spread out and ask me. We have as much as feedback from everyone, so we didn't really talk much about the target audience yet. So I think that we should limit the target.
I think if you know who your target of the surveys are, then it means that you can ask more specific questions. So if you knew that you were targeting the survey at managers, then you say, would you add this to your workplace? And you would, in the post survey, you'd probably ask things like, why wouldn't you add this to your workplace, or what do you think would stop you from distributing this, if you were asking a manager, right? Whereas other questions of just the end users is like, before they play it, you would say, first we would ask, like, what's the attitude towards it? What's your attitude towards physical games? How many games do you play like this? And see how that changes of, would you have used this? But if there are things that, like, it doesn't really matter if you do them, some questions can only ask post, and some questions you could only ask pre, but because you're doing a pre-post, if you can think of anything that might be affected by them using it, then ask that both times. Is something really interesting to think about.
That's good.
And you could do 2 different surveys with different, I know we're just dealing with students here, but you could run the survey, write up one survey that you'd give to customers and one survey that you might give to managers, and that's 2 different evaluation methods for your assignment, which is awesome.
one to the
Yeah. So then you could talk about those two different surveys and how you came up with the questions in them and stuff like that. And that would be, for the HD level, we're looking at a couple of different types of evaluation, different surveys rather than just one. So if you can come up with two, then it'll be good.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, so a survey can be done with different audience as well?
Yeah, that's right. So I would consider those as two separate ones because you're asking different questions in each one.
Oh, even the pre and post should not have to be...
So the pre and post should be on the same person, yes. Yeah. But I'm thinking you do, a pre and post for customers and a pre and post for managers.
So two clusters, like...
Yeah. And they're different data sets and you do different analysis on them.
Sure.
They're just two parts of your assignment in the same thing. Yeah. It'd be interesting, I think.
Okay, we will decide.
Yeah, have a bit of a think about that, and if you have any other questions, let me know.
Yeah, we decided the questions, some of it already, but not really decided by team because they have more questions. How many questions should be suitable for the pre?
I wouldn't overload people with questions, so I wouldn't have more than 10. I would have up to 10. I wouldn't have too many. Unless you're really wanting to collect a lot of specific information, you don't need to over-survey people. Yeah.
But it's not a good idea to post on Facebook and asking general people no.
Well, you could, but for this unit, I wouldn't care that much. But if we're doing proper research and storing people's names and data, we do have to go through a proper ethical process.
Okay.
So I would avoid running it on Facebook with people who might get angry at you. Are you storing their name? If you do that, then you just need to be clear to them how their data is going to be stored and used. Will they be identified? Things like that.
I see.
But I, in general, can't condone storing of personal information like that. So I would, we're just practicing here, and so with other students, it's probably fine.
Maybe I need to email you more after I decide with my team about it.
Yeah, that's totally fine.
Yeah,
sure, no problems.
Thank you so much.
No worries. Yes.
So, can you just tell me if these are right? So, these are my test tasks, right? So, just I'll probably change them a bit more, but if I have a test task sheet,
yep, great.
And then after that, they'll just do. This is the overseer, so it's just got all the tasks, whether they completed it, yes, no, or assisted.
Yep.
And then we time them while they do it. And then there's a 10-question survey to identify them as a broad thing. Is that what we would need for it?
I'm relatively okay with this. You do just need to describe why you came up with the questions that you did, and so what, just documenting what test tasks are and examples of that being done before in a similar context to this. But overall, as these being your tools in your appendix, this is great. It's totally fine. Yep.
Okay. So it doesn't need to be these specific set of questions that so-and-so used. It just has to be the model in which we use them.
Yep, I'm happy with that.
Okay, cool.
Alrighty, let's continue on, finish off these slides. Yeah, there's nothing else I want to look at on Milo this week. So this is a mildly interesting slide, but we won't spend too much time on it. Thinking about the concept of whether or not a computer should apologise. And so this paper from 1996, these authors argue that computers should be made to apologise in order to emulate what humans do. And I wonder if users would be more forgiving of computers saying sorry as they are of when other people say sorry. I don't know. What do you think? If a computer was trying to say sorry, would you be more forgiving than if it wasn't just saying sorry, if it just said an error message? But would you be more forgiving of the computer's mistake if it said, I'm sorry, I couldn't find this page?
I find that annoying. It's I think it's the newer blue screen messages telling you that they're sorry.
Yeah.
It's annoying.
Why is it annoying?
It just seems so insincere.
Yeah. That's a good word there to suggest that it's a computer. How can it be capable of being sorry? So when it says that it's sorry, we immediately jump to the conclusion that it is being insincere. I like that. That's a good comment there. Hey, there's a word sincere on this slide, so maybe you were just reading off that, but also I suspect you didn't. Yeah, there you go. So that's an important factor in this. So another thing that we're looking at in the area of emotional interaction is detecting emotions. So if we want to try and make our system react to different emotions, then we need to try and detect those emotions in the first place. And so we have sensing technologies to measure galvanic skin response, so things like stress or any kind of, what was the word I used last week? Arousement, to refer to all of those things. Stop sniggering, you. And so the aim of these sort of systems is to try and predict users' emotions and aspects of their behaviour. And there's an example on this slide. We won't look at this in any great detail, but facial coding is something that can be done, that basically analyzes images captured by webcam. And it's something that systems do, which try to gauge how engaged a user is when looking at certain things. And there's 6 core expressions according to this: sadness, happiness, disgust, fear, surprise and anger. But those of you who have watched Pixar know that there's only 4. Pixar's up. Not up. My brain's not working. What's that movie called? Inside Out. Yeah. Anyway, something that I suspect but don't have any knowledge about that Facebook might be doing is that when we're tagging pictures of ourselves and we know we take a selfie, one thing that Facebook really wants us to do these days is attach some kind of activity to that, but more specifically we say how we're feeling, and we use pre-coded things that they've got in there where we might say, feeling happy, takes a snapshot with me and my avocado sandwich. But also, you know, it wants us to select from a list of moods and emotions, and it's very likely, almost certain, that they have a database of what people's faces look like when they were feeling the emotion that they tagged themselves in. And in general, people were probably accurate enough about, or truthful enough that the incorrect entries into that database are insignificant. That's not on the slides or anything like that, but I suspect that's something that's going on at Facebook with all of that metadata that they're collecting, and they try to make us select these pre-selected things because it's easier for them to quantify. Rather than searching through what we write, they're almost certainly still doing that. But if we can click on a button that says, I was happy when I took this picture, or I was disgusted when I took this picture, and it's a picture of poop, then, you know, they've got an image catalogue there. So there's some software here called Afdex, but we're not going to look at that because it's almost certainly old these days. Yep. That's basically some stuff that I was saying there, that this sort of stuff's being tracked. Indirect emotional detection. So determining someone's suitability for a job, or trying to determine how they will vote in an election. I was helping my wife do a job application, and they were making us run through a bunch of questionnaires, and the explicit goal of that questionnaire was to determine our values in a sales position and what sort of behaviour we would have if we were in that position, or if she was in that position. So this is definitely a thing. And so, yeah, this is another topic within the area of emotional interaction: persuasive technologies and behaviour change. So systems that are deliberately designed to try and change people's attitudes and behaviours. And there's a wide range of techniques that are being used to try and change what we do or think. And these are some examples. But certainly the concept of behaviour change when it comes to human-computer interaction isn't limited to this sort of thing. A lot of you in your assignments were already thinking well, all of you should have been thinking about behaviour change, of how do we get people to change their behaviour from sedentary to active in the workplace. A lot of you came up with the concept of gamification. Whether or not you labelled it as that or just thought you'd come up with it yourself was another thing. But also serious games to try and, tell a story and change our opinions also fall underneath this heading of persuasive technologies. And so I will talk more about this before the semester's over, I'm sure. But let's think a little bit about nudging for the moment. So you might deliberately use nudging systems. What are some examples perhaps of nudging systems? Well, I'm not going to ask that because they're basically on the slide here. But things like alarms, activity trackers, using Facebook events counts as a nudging thing where you say you're going to an event and you are basically then saying, I want to get a notification about when this event is going to happen. I want to be nudged about this. But there's also times when we can discover the system was nudging us and we didn't really ask for it. So, a lot of us play mobile games. The game nudges us to play again by implementing some kind of daily reward system. So you get on a streak for playing the game multiple days in a row, things like that. One thing that happened to me was that, I was just browsing eBay and then I got a reminder email from eBay that something that I'd spent a reasonable amount of time on the page, but I'd never actually said, watch this item. It fully just sent me an email saying, this item's on sale now. I didn't even say I wanted that reminder, that nudge. So if I'd said, watch this product, then that's me opting into being nudged. But these systems do indirect nudging or, stuff that we didn't ask for. Can anyone think of an example where they've discovered a system was nudging them, but they didn't sign up for that, so to speak? Any other examples? So we're not just left with my examples.
Mine's also eBay related, but
yeah.
Similarly, if you buy something on eBay, they'll sometimes recommend you similar items without you kind of wanting that. And sometimes they're exactly the same items. It's like, why? I just bought one.
Yep. So, recommender systems, but also ones that, email you, flat out provide unsolicited advice is a thing. So, flipping topics like a crazy person, these slides are, but now talking about Nintendo's Pocket Pikachu. So this was an example of trying to change bad habits and improve well-being. So the idea is this thing, do we have a picture of it or not? No. Someone can Google it if they like. Was designed to motivate children to be more physically active, so something relatively related to what we were doing in our assignment. And you'd have a little digital pet that lives in the device. So I never had one of these, but I assume this is sounding similar to a Tamagotchi, except it's much related to you actually doing physical activity like walking, running or jumping. I did have a Poke Walker. I had one of those. That's a more recent example, which was just a pedometer that you could load your Pokemon on, and when you did steps, that would give you XP to your Pokemon that you played in the full Pokemon game. None of this Pokemon Go rubbish. And so, if the owner doesn't exercise, the virtual pet becomes angry and refuses to play anymore. Why is this related to emotional interaction? Yes?
Sort of guilt-tripping into doing something?
Yep, that's one way of looking at this, is that it's guilting you into doing your physical interaction, because if you don't, the pet will become sick and die. This is looking exactly like one of the assignments that I just marked. It was a really good assignment. Their prototype had really pretty GIFs of a flower growing. I don't know if that person's in the room who made those. They were really cool. Why else might this be related to emotional interaction? Why am I showing a slide about this, other than because it was in this presentation? So we've mentioned that that this is a form of guilt tripping, I guess, but also the idea that we should that sometimes we form an emotional connection to our digital pets. And I would argue that the same sort of thing is plausible when it comes to an emotional connection to our online avatars. So I don't know if there's any of you that play MMOs or anything like that, but you know, if you're playing World of Warcraft and you've spent tens of hours, hundreds of hours, I guess, controlling this fictional avatar of yourself, you're likely to form some kind of emotional connection to that. And so, I don't know, maybe we should make something that your WoW character dies if you don't walk, run or jump. I'm sure that would be slightly effective, but also probably not very good for World of Warcraft players. So yeah, the question is, how effective can these forms of interactive technologies be? And that is the core question that we ask when we try to research these things. So it's one of the sub-research questions of my work in energy conservation. So out of these three things here, which do we think is the most effective? So on the left here, we just have a poster that says, elevators are for wimps. There's nothing digital about this, it's just a poster saying, do a stair climb on, holy crap, that was yesterday, Friday, September 24th. But clearly in 2010, dates are weird. This one in the middle here is an ambient display that has lights on the ground, and when you walk near it they twinkle, but in a fashion that tries to lead you towards the stairs instead of the elevator. So when you're standing waiting for the elevator, these little lights twinkle in a path towards the stairs. And the one on the right here is a persuasive display where these bowls in this little environment go higher the more people are detected walking up the stairs every day. So if 100 people walk up the stairs that day, they'll be higher than if only 10 people walked up the stairs that day. Relatively easy thing to detect, but then visualised in some fancy way. So which do we think might be the most effective for you, personally? So would you react to the elevators are for wimps and say, oh, I'm going to go and use the stairs? Not so much. Some people might see it as a challenge, but most people will probably be offended by it. The one on the ground there in the middle is, to me, an interesting one that, you know, I'd see it and maybe the first time I would be curious as to where the dots are going, and then I'd realise that it was leading me to the stairs, and then I would go straight on back to the elevator. But there's probably something about these bowls here that, you know, as the day wears on, we see the bowls get higher, and maybe if there was some indicator of the highest they've ever been, then I would be more motivated to perhaps take the stairs in this case. Although it's spiral staircase, so maybe not. They're annoying, inefficient, hate them. But, you know, it's an interesting approach they've taken there. And so there would be papers for at least these two suggesting, was there any particular change? So mobile apps are a thing these days that are really good at being able to help people monitor and change their behaviour. Or at least they're good at monitoring. It's not clear whether or not they change people's behaviour very well, but there's certainly a million apps out there for tracking your fitness, sleeping and weight. At least with things like fitness, it's able to automatically track a lot of things, at least in terms of steps and stuff like that. I use a fitness tracker and only use the Google Health one, but certainly for a little while there I tried to measure or track my sleeping patterns. Because it wasn't automatically recorded though, and the onus was on me to record when I got up and when I didn't, things like that, I found I didn't use it that much. So I think this is somewhat related to how much we can actually automatically record these things. The app that I was using was trying to record that automatically, but it wasn't very good at it as well, so I had to correct it all the time. It was a Samsung one. Some other things to note here are online leaderboards and charts to show how you've done in relation to their peers and friends. This is a very short dot point about something that's effectively something that comprises about 25% of my PhD in terms of different forms of leaderboards. So they don't imply it here, but the kind of leaderboards that we often see are superstar leaderboards. I might have already mentioned it in this class, where you can only see the top 10. So I'm talking about leaderboards that you see on an arcade machine or something like that. It only stores the 10 best results, and so if you're not on it, then you just get demotivated by the fact that, oh, I'm never going to possibly get these crazy scores, and it's just telling you who the superstars are. But if we show leaderboards that are normative, so show people around you, then it shows you the people who it's plausible that you could beat in the future because they're only a little bit above you, and it shows you people that you've just beaten. Maybe you've seen them a previous time that you looked at the leaderboard. So that's one grouping, is just simply showing you where you are in the grand scheme of things, not even showing you your total score, so not showing you that you're number 1,000 in the world, just showing you that there's a few people ahead of you and a few people below you. Is one way, but also who do we just show on a leaderboard? So we could show a superstar leaderboard, but do we show our friends? So there's research to suggest that leaderboards that are filtered by our friends are much more effective because we have a bit more context about who's on there. So when I'm playing a racing game and I can see that I'm 10,000 on the leaderboard, but Ian is number 10 on the leaderboard, I'm surprised, for one, because I think Ian's not that good at racing games, but actually he's amazing at them. So I learnt that through that leaderboard. But all the other friends that I had on there, I could see people who were a similar skill level to me. And I had a bit of an idea of what their skill level is because I've played with them. And so I feel I could make up the 1 second difference between me and them or something like that. So there's just more context, more questions, more data that I can get out of a leaderboard like this than just a superstar one. But also in my PhD, I was looking at leaderboards in terms of people. So we were looking at where they were in the game, and that was heavily defined by how much energy you saved in the real world. But if we just showed people a superstar leaderboard, it was reasonably unfair, because everyone's usage habits are different when it comes to energy consumption. There are some variables, though, that I used to group people together, such as how big their house was in square footage, how many people lived in the house and how many were adults and how many were children, whether or not the people were working or not. And just from even those three variables, if you show the people who are working and have 4 people in their family and are in a 4-bedroom house, and you show them other people with those same characteristics, then they're more comparable. So even though they're not their friends, they're what we call a similar group. And so that's something that we tried out in my work as well. One limitation to that is that you need a lot of people to be able to make proper groupings there. If there's only one person that has, one participant that has a family of 5, you're going to have to show them people with families of 4, for example. So I saw the word leaderboards, got triggered and went on a rant. Yeah, so there's other apps that also try to encourage reflection that then in turn increase well-being. So this is a very glass is half full kind of slide, that there are apps that are trying to do this, but it's not easy. Yay, energy reduction. Reduction. Energy conservation. Triggered again. These are some things that I did that I have seen before because I did the proper research about existing products. The one on the side here is power aware cord. So in this one, it's an ambient display, but the cord that goes to your electronic device has this sort of flowing light on it to show you that electricity is being used by this device. And so it gives you more of an indication that energy is being used and might entice you to go, hey, I should probably turn that light off because I don't need it right now. So I don't need all these electrons flowing. Was the idea behind that one. And Watson over here measures how many, the cost of your energy usage on a device that sits in the home, so you can easily track this. These sorts of displays that connect to your smart meter, though, it's hard, it doesn't provide you with enough information, and it doesn't provide you any social context for how much you're using compared to other people. Something that's really big in the area of energy consumption is knowing how much energy you're using compared to similar others. So when you get your energy bill, like Aurora and stuff like that, they try to show you where your energy is compared to 2 people in a house, 3 people in a house, 4 people in a house. They show you that little graph. Mine is, there's only 2 of us in our house, but we're well below a 1-person household. Ian has 2 people in his house, and he is twice that of a 4-person house. Sorry. That is true. So his energy usage is very low for the last 6 months, and probably until the end of the year at this rate. So one last thing on energy consumption. This is a vaguely interesting one of using large-scale visualization. And the reason they've done this is because it's information for the entire street. I'm not entirely sure. So it does say it's a stenciled display on the road surface, so this clearly isn't going to be updated in real time, but because it's a graph of data, they only appending to the graph each time, I think. Or maybe they filled stuff in each week between these 6 weeks. It's not clear to me. But you could look out your window in this place and see this display. Apparently it reduced electricity consumption by 15% over that period of time. And it is showing, again, this idea of social normative theory of how we compare to other people. So this street, how much energy are they using compared to the rest of the people in Brighton? And so in this graph, we can see they're actually below average. I'm assuming that means that they're using less energy than the average. And it's an interesting picture they've chosen here, because actually over time, they've started to use more. Assuming that is the case, and that would be in contradiction to the 15% quoted on this slide, why do you think this sort of display might actually make people not use less energy and possibly allow them to use more energy?
Just probably loses impact over time.
Yep, that's definitely something that can happen with these interventions, is that they're a gimmick, and so maybe the first week, yeah, this is fun, this is cool, but it loses its impact over time. What's another reason? So studies have shown, I wasn't expecting you to know this one, but it's something we can think about, is that the more real-time our feedback is, the more likely we are to reduce our energy usage. So if we could see what our average was or how much we'd used in the day down to the second, and it updates even to the point where if we turn on a light we can see our graph changing, then we're more likely to have some kind of conservation effect noticed. In this one it's clearly not real time because someone needs to draw this in chalk, although I suppose it's plausible that someone was drawing these values every hour or 2 hours. But yeah, the feedback here is not real time, but that wasn't an answer I was looking for, it's just something I wanted to mention. What's another reason, I guess, that this sort of feedback might make us use more energy? So if we look at this graph, imagine we're on day 1 of week 3. What is this telling us if there was just a dot here that says we're below average, we're below the Brighton average? What does this tell us, other than what I've just said?
You're below average, so it's probably the same to use, maybe a bit more.
Yeah. It's a real thing, that we see that we're below average here. There's a bunch of people who are using much more energy than us, So what does it matter? We can just off we go and make use more energy because we'll still be winning even. So if it was a matter of competition, we've got a fair bit in hand, although there's no indication on this graph that much of what the units are. So it's a thing, and in social normative theory we call this the boomerang effect, where people who are shown that they're doing much better than other people will think, okay, I can slack off a little bit here and increase my usage. But hopefully you'd think that the people who are above average would maybe try and do better. There's a point where they think they're too far behind, and so the message can be demotivating. But in this case, yeah, it's that they're already saving a lot more. Why do I need to save more than that? And so if you graph this, you get a bit of a boomerang effect, that you get the opposite of what you might have hoped. You're not just going to get everyone reducing stuff. Another thing that comes in with energy conservation that I won't talk about too much is that in my study at least, I focused on people who are already using less energy. So they were already energy conscious, so there wasn't a chance to reduce their energy anymore. So even on this graph, it's how do you get lower than there? So we'll fly through these last slides to finish things up. Another concept in this emotional interaction is the idea of trust. So phishing is where the web is used to deceive people into parting with personal details. I originally read this as the web used to deceive people. It certainly still does, arguably more. And so you get internet fraudsters trying to access bank accounts, blah, blah, blah. Vulnerable people will fall for that, for sure. And the internet just provides people with ways of doing this, of phishing. This slide doesn't even really talk that much about trust, but I guess there are companies that have worked very, very hard to gain a level of trust between them and their customers. So the whole idea of people using PayPal is that it's supposed to be a trustworthy way of paying for things on the internet. And you're not going to jump ship to some other PayPal competitor that easily because you have a level of trust in PayPal, is all I've got to say about that. We've already looked at Pepper, and we've already looked at Clippy in terms of, well, Clippy isn't trying to be human, but Pepper is certainly trying to be human-like. And this is a thing that we've seen since before computers, of course, in advertising of inanimate objects trying to appear human, and I suppose Clippy comes under that. And it's exploited in human-computer interaction with the intent of trying to make the user experience more enjoyable, more motivating, make people feel at ease, and reduce their anxiety when using a system. We're just going to see a couple of examples of a computer, I guess, attempting to be human-like in its speaking. So we'll have a look at these messages, and then at the end we'll think which ones do we prefer. So in this one, hello Chris, nice to see you again, welcome back. Now what were we doing last time? Oh, yes, exercise 5, let's start that again. As opposed to user 24 commence exercise 5. Which would you prefer? Yeah, that's the answer I was expecting from some of you, that, yeah, I would prefer number 2 sometimes. When we look at item number 1 there, it's patronising, I guess. It's inefficient, so particularly if this was spoken and not even something you read, then it takes even longer. But even just reading this as a welcome message to a system that you use every day, you know, if there was some, you've got to read this and then check, is there some kind of data in here that's actually important to us? You'd probably learn over time that no, the key thing that we're looking for is exercise 5. But, you know, in this general verbose thing, it would be a pain if you had to read through this all the time. So it adds cognitive burden in the attempt to try and make us more comfortable with the system. So when we're thinking about feedback, when we get something wrong. Number 1 here, now Chris, that's not right, you can do better than that, try again. Or just incorrect, try again. What do people think? Number 2? Number 1? So yeah, I'm on team number 2 there for that one. But again, why? And I guess it's these words we've said before of sincerity. Is the computer being sincere? Does it really know that we can do better than that? Does it have data to support that assertion? It's also being patronising again. So there's data to suggest that computers that flatter and praise users in an education context had a positive impact, and students were more willing to continue with exercises with this kind of feedback. But this is a pretty old study now, so it would be interesting to replicate that study. There's talk on the other side here of they're deceptive, so they're insincere, and it can make people feel anxious, can make people feel inferior or stupid. I don't really feel inferior or stupid when using a computer, and those messages wouldn't. I would feel superior to this computer that's being written in a weird way. They don't like screen characters that wave their hands or wave their fingers and say, oh, that's not right, you can do better. People do tend to prefer item number 2 when asked that. And so we often think about personalised feedback as being a thing that we might want to include in our systems, and I am trying to put that into something that that I'm making at the moment. But this study from 1982 suggests that people think personalised feedback is less honest and makes users feel less responsible for their actions. I think these days personalised feedback, if we can trust that the feedback's coming from some kind of actually well-written AI or machine learning system, then I get the feeling that this is going to sway the other way. Now that we know the computers are much more capable of providing personalised feedback than in 1982. Virtual characters, yep, we've seen a lot of these before. So they try and provide a persona that's welcoming and has a personality to make users feel involved. But they can give people a false sense of belief. Maybe they're annoying, definitely, but also maybe they're not trustworthy. So if Pepper is trying to be a kiosk robot, some people, when they're interacting with her, regardless of how comfortable she tries to make you feel or interactive she tries to be, you might not trust the data that's coming out of that robot. So, is it trying to sell you something? I have that feeling when I go into a regular shop. And if it's a robot that's literally programmed that way, then there's just no uncertainty about it. That person in the shop isn't being nice to me for the sake of it. They are really just trying to get me to buy something. And so it's even worse when it comes to a robot. Yep, so virtual agents. And this is in the vein of Clippy again, where they're trying to bring about an emotional response and try and help you in some way. There's a few factors that we're not going to look at too much at all, just because we're running out of time. But their appearance is important and their behaviour is important. Who'd have thunk it? And so this appearance being important is related to the uncanny valley that I was talking about earlier before the break. So this question here about, are simple cartoon-like characters more realistic characters better? And so that depends on where they lie on the uncanny valley. So if this were an exam question, it wouldn't be, you could come up with an answer, but the answer to me is that it would depend on where they sit on the uncanny valley. Because realistic characters might be appealing, but very often we fall into the valley. And behaviour is related to that as well. So we're nearly out of slides, but who thinks that A would be more preferable to B in terms of a robot? They are both robots. So A, yeah, and B. Excellent, some people were listening. So why? People who chose A, why? Why do you like little robot here, robot dog, as opposed to bunny?
Honestly, I wouldn't mind cute or eat robots, but the example given is just not good.
Yep, that's true.
That's my big take, if I'm honest.
Yeah, it's not clear what that bunny robot does. To me, looking at robot A, its functions are more visible in terms of what it should be able to do, the ways that you'd interact with it, or be able to see its emotions, or its response to you is more clear. That, you know, maybe because we've seen Asimov before and stuff like that, we know that, or, you know, we've seen Wall-E, that when we look at that black part on his head, he's probably going to have some display on there that he uses to interact with us, whereas I have no idea what that bunny does. So what are the implications of all of these things that we've had a look at today? So should we create products that adapt accordingly to people's different emotional states? So when people are feeling angry, for example, should an interface be more attentive and informative than when they are happy? If we can detect that someone's angry in the first place, then we've seen approaches of trying to make a system react in a certain way, so making a system be apologetic or say some of the things we saw on those previous slides. Arguably, if someone's already angry and then you bring up a what was the word I used? Insincere or patronising message, then they're just going to get more angry, possibly. When we're talking about products that are intended for use during leisure, then we can get away with more rather than things that are trying to be a serious task. So something like our word processor that we want to have be efficient and work well for us, that's probably one of the reasons why Clippy just should not have existed in word processors at all in the first place. It's not the place for a fun, frivolous character, I don't think, when it's a particularly serious task. But that dot point, there's a huge discussion you could have about that when comparing this to serious games. So summary, this is all the stuff we looked at. Yeah, I'm not going to go through these dot points. But yeah, that's it for this week. We've covered chapter 5. Next week, who knows what we'll talk about? It's a mystery. But in week 12, I have planned a guest lecture, but I think I already mentioned this. The way that that'll work is that it'll be some form of Q&A between me and the guy who developed Exotime. Some of you may have referenced Exotime in your assignments. And so if you have any questions about Exotime or how they evaluate it or how they've tested it, because they've been working with this software for a while, you know, shoot them through to me and I can ask them questions. Saves me having to think of a million questions, but also think of them to bring to the lecture to ask the guy. Come to it even if it's just to see me fail at technology, because he'll be in Launceston, I'll be here, there'll be other people in another place in Launceston, there's going to be a Skype call, there's going to be a stream, all at the same time, and it's probably all going to break. I might even be in Launceston, and that means one of you guys has to run the computer up here in week 12. Who knows, but tune in. That's it. See you, Launceston. Yep.
When it comes to the exams and we're studying for it,
yep.
Like if we run through the content, if you've skipped over half of it, how do you know if it's applicable?
Yeah, I'm hoping I'll get time to make a version of all the slide sets where I delete the slides where I skipped over stuff.
Okay.
Yeah. Otherwise, you know, you're one of the people who's been to the lecture, so you'll know, you know, if you look at the content again, or you look at the slides and go, oh, we didn't look at that, and we did have a conversation about this.
Still hard to do for 13 weeks though.
It is. And so I think, since you've mentioned it, and I had already thought of it, it sounds like it's something I will do, but I can't make any promises, but it sounds fair that I should edit the slides, make a version of the slides that have slides deleted that we didn't cover.
Or even give like a slight debrief of what the exam content will be.
Yeah, so that's planned for week 13 anyway. There's always one of those. And so I'll be keeping that in mind that, we've had these sets of slides and we've delivered sections of it. And so you can use last year's exam as a guide anyway. Like, I'm not changing it dramatically at all, actually, as it turns out. But yeah, I will do a few of those things. So there'll be a week 13 lecture on an exam.
Okay.
Yeah.